One, two, three. Welcome to the Malibuddha movement. I'm Zach, and this is Johnny at Wellenzeit surfboards. He's a surfboard shaper, glasser. He does everything to do with making surfboards. And welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How are you?
Good to have you here, Zach.
Thanks. So he's glassed about the last 6 of my custom boards that I have made, and they turned out really, really wonderful. And I just brought over another board for him to glass, so that's why I'm over here today.
Well, thank you for the business. I appreciate it. Your boards are beautiful, to say the least.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to glass. So,
You just got your knee fixed?
yeah, man. So I had an injury back in the Army where I took my rucksack off at the end of a long march, and it got stuck on my canteen, and I had a mortar on the back, a giant mortar tube, and it swung around, and it hit my knee and fell underneath my knee, and I fell backwards. Well, I fell forward, and I hit my knee on the ground, and then I fell backwards and pulled all the tendons apart, and I fractured my tibia. I broke a piece off of it, and my femur. My femur also got some kind of crack, but my patella, my kneecap, got cut in half that way.
Oh my God.
So they had to screw it back together. After that, I stayed in the Army for another 6 years.
That was in Iraq?
No, that was in basic training.
Oh, fuck.
So I stayed in the Army for almost 7 years after that, and then I don't know, my knee worked okay, but it was never the same. And then over time, my kneecap on the bottom eroded away the bone, and the screws were poking out.
And
And
see it through the skin?
no. So it was on the underside. So this is the top where the skin is. This is underneath, and it wore down like that. So then my screws were sticking out at the bottom, and they were scraping against my cartilage.
Oh.
So it really started to hurt about 6 months ago, and every time I went to go surf, I would have like this immense stabbing, sharp pain, and then I'd have arthritis for days afterwards. So I went in and I got it checked through the VA, and long story short, the VA is always too busy to do work for veterans. So I ended up going through community care, which is you can't get an appointment within 30 days. You get to go to a private practitioner that's sponsored by the VA. So I did that. And the VA told me nothing wrong. Here's a brace. Here's some Motrin.
Gosh.
Just truck on. I said, no, I want a CT scan. And they said, CT scan 6 months from now. I was like, no, let me get community care. So I got to see somebody in Oxnard, and this doctor saw in my report from the VA that they said that the screws were sticking out, but they didn't tell me.
That must have been so painful.
It was mentally and emotionally. I was like, dude, they screwed me, Like, literally. Let yourself be screwed. So the doctor basically said we have to remove the screws, and then he did another x-ray, and he found out that the screw heads where you have to unscrew it were on the bottom of the kneecap, not the top, so he couldn't make a simple incision and pull them out to the top. He had to open my whole knee, flip over the kneecap, and then pull the screws out. So it went from a 10-day recovery to like a 2 to 3 month recovery. I get to surgery, I wake up, my mom is there over my bed. She's like, hey Johnny. I'm like, hey. Ugh. And she's like, hey, by the way, the surgery was unsuccessful. And I was like, awesome. Excellent.
So what did they have to redo?
So basically he said he couldn't get the screws out. It was fused to the bone. He couldn't get them out. They weren't sticking out enough that he could get a good grip with the vice grips. So he said basically he's got to go in again. He's got to cut away the bone, pull the screws out. But if he cuts away from the bone, he's got to put a partial knee replacement of the kneecap and a little track for it to go on. So I was like, well, when is this going to happen? He's like 2-3 weeks. I was like, okay. So I started to recover from this dastardly surgery just to go back into surgery again. And I woke up, he said he still couldn't get the screws out. But what he did is he cut it flush, put the cap on there, and put the track on there. So I still have the screws in there. He just cut it, half of my kneecap off, replaced it with plastic and aluminum for the track, and that's it. Or whatever, titanium.
Gosh, it's such a nightmare.
But the second surgery was worse. The recovery was awful. I was in bed. I couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. It was so painful and so inflamed and so, like, it was the size of a small watermelon, you know?
But so the screws aren't rubbing anything anymore, though?
No. So there's a cap over it. Everything that way is supposed to be fixed. But the atrophy in the muscle that I had for the last 9 weeks, that's the hard part to recover from, you know? Like, all my tendons are
shrunk.
Yeah, and they're not working well, and if I try too hard, I end up tearing a tendon or, you know, pulling it or getting inflammation or whatever, you know, like tendonitis. So it's hard to come back from. But I'm walking now most of the time without the cane, but I still have to use the cane sometimes. But I think I'm ready to get back to work, man.
Have you been in the water?
I haven't. I had some opportunities, but I haven't gone out because in conjunction with my knee, my back goes out because I'm hobbling, and then my gait is off, and then my muscles are overreacting, and then I get, you know, lower back tightness. So that's the only thing that's really been preventing me, and somebody else to go out with, because, you know.
You don't want to like even like boogie board or anything?
I was thinking just paddling out, you know. I'm worried about, you know, my knee laying on the board, so I got some knee pads.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm ready. I just, you know, when it's calm enough and I feel like I won't get winded because I've been out of the water for 2 months and I gained like 10 fucking pounds. So, you know, just eating and not exercising.
What if you use like one of those inflatable mats?
Yeah, I think I can do a surfboard.
Okay.
I just gotta do it.
Yeah.
I just gotta get out there, man. You know? I've been starved of it, and I almost feel like if I go out there and I paddle out, I'm gonna want to fucking stand up. I'm gonna catch a wave and ride on my belly and be like, nah.
Then just maybe get hurt.
And then get hurt. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just one of those things that I'm debating, but. You know, part of me just wants to wait until I can actually surf, but I think it might be healthy for me to get back into the water.
I mean, even just like dunk your head. I mean, you're right there. We're at the harbor right now.
Yeah.
I mean, just go in and get like a little like baptism or something. Ocean, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Dang, that's serious, man. I hope you like get fully recovered and like you can be out there and like have fun on like a 2 to 3 foot day or something.
I hope so too. Hopefully after this I can surf as much as I can, as much as I want, and I lose my weight again and get back to my, you know, fighting shape and
be better than before.
Hopefully, you know. The interesting thing is, you know, since I've been shaping, I've had the freedom to make whatever I want. That's the ultimate perk in the fact that I can shape in glass mountain boards is that if I feel like I want to try something, I don't have to go to the rack and buy it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just make it. You know what I'm saying? And that really progressed my surfing past anything that I've ever done before.
Just a side note, he hand shapes every single one of his boards with no machines. How many boards have you made now by hand, so the audience can know?
I don't know, maybe 500.
Okay, well,
somewhere around there.
That's at least like 3,000 hours in the shaping room, right? Purely shaping.
I think that's hard to calculate because the first 20 boards took me a long time to shape. You know, the first board that I shaped took me 5 days.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? It took me a long time. I didn't understand the mechanics of shaping, the art of shaping, the flow. But over time, I got good enough and fast enough. Well, you get faster because you get very comfortable with what you're doing. You know what you're doing. you see something, you're able to sculpt it right out. That took a while to happen. Once that happened, right now, like if I do a longboard, hand shaped it, that's the only thing I do, takes me, I timed it on 2 or 3 boards because I filmed myself, and the video is 77 minutes long.
For 2 boards?
No, for 1 board.
77 minutes.
Each one.
So almost just
Yeah,
barely over
73,
an hour.
77. So yeah, about an hour and 15 minutes.
Wow.
A short board probably takes me 45 minutes to an hour. And then, but the details is really what matters in the board. But to get it planed out and almost ready, probably about an hour. And then, tweaking and stuff. And then, I think there's a lot to say in the final details of the board. Everything has to be planned out before you do it. Because once you cut, you can't uncut. That's it. You got one shot. Technically, you can just try it again with another blank, but
that's $100 out the window.
Yeah, and it's it's all that effort gone. So you have an idea of what you're going to make, and then inspiration comes in through the process. But I think that it's really, I have a picture of it in my head before I start. The most difficult part for me about shaping is actually starting the process, actually making the first cut. Because before that, it's all thinking. I think about it for weeks and weeks beforehand. And then before I even start on the blank, I know what I'm going to do.
And you don't draw it out or anything?
No, only the outline. Now,
Okay.
I used to do, so I'm traditional self-taught. I started from scratch. So when I made an outline on a board, by the way, every outline that I ever use is proprietary. This one I made. I've never copied an outline from another board. So when I make an outline, what I used to do is I would lay down some masonite on the floor. I'd put the dimensions of what I wanted in the nose, in the width, where I wanted the width, from nose to tail, and then the tail width. And then I would draw it out with a piece of thin masonite strip wood about an inch thick or an inch wide, 1/8 inch thick, and I'd bend it around to the curve with some weights, like bricks and stuff.
To hold it in place.
Hold in place, and I would get half the outline. And I would draw that, and then I would have a template. Well, that made me understand how to make a template. The problem with that was the wood wasn't very rigid, so it would have bends in certain areas that I didn't want, and the curves weren't very continuous. So after doing that for probably 50 boards, I finally started to use a program. It's a CAD program. Yeah, computer-assisted design. And what I do, this is the same thing, except it gives me a bird's eye view. It lets me actually see the outline from a distance. When you do it on the floor, you can't see it from a distance unless you climb a ladder and you look over it and you can see, this shape needs to change a little bit. What I realized was making the widths in certain areas of the board doesn't matter as much as the overall outline. So the overall outline, based on whatever size of the board you're going to do, it depends on where you want the emphasis and focus of the function of the board to be. Whether your wide point is back or wide point forward, how wide or thin your tails compared to the length of the board. That makes what the board does functional. So it has less to do with the numbers. Now, when you do enough of them, then you know the numbers. You know the widths, and you can say, my tails are usually for this board, it's 15 3/4 wide at 12 inches. And I know that through experience. But I don't plan the board and say this is going to be 15 3/4 wide in the tail. I plan the outline, and I see it, and it makes sense to me because of the functionality of it and where the narrow parts are. There'll be more rail-to-rail transition, whatever. So I build it that way, and I rarely get it wrong. If I do, it's a minor adjustment.
What makes it wrong?
When it doesn't work.
Okay.
So what makes it wrong in the outline is it'll always work. I mean, you can surf anything, but if you find that there's an issue and it pops up in your head when you're surfing, then it's probably wrong. That's what I consider wrong. If the tail is too narrow and it bogs when you're on it and you can't, really stomp on it, and that's what you're trying to do, that's a problem. If the nose is too wide, you'll know that if you're making, a sweeping cutback and in the pocket, and you go somewhere like a little bit more vertical and you try to turn it and your nose gets caught in the water, you kind of bury that nose and it digs in, then the nose is too wide. Now, it doesn't mean the nose is too wide, it just means it's too wide for you.
So a bigger person might be able to ride that board.
Or someone who surfs off the tail and lifts the nose when they turn.
Okay.
I
surf off my back foot a lot.
Right.
But I try to put more weight on my front foot, because I was at Waco last week and I would see in the footage that I'm like, oh, it's too much off the tail, and then I would put more weight on the front foot and then use the rail more, and it looked a lot better. So,
and what type of board was that?
It was like a 510 thruster.
Okay. So thrusters, I find they're every board's a different animal, but thrusters, it's easier to use the entire board all at the same time, the whole rail. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
With longer boards, especially my bread and butter in the mid-length realm, there's definitely a difference between the center of the board and the tail of the board, and that line varies with the type of board, like a hull. The center is more the focus than the tail. But there are boards that I've made that are really wide in the nose and narrower in the tail, and they surf really well off the tail, especially in like a point break. But some people have tried it and use it as like a thruster and try to surf it also heavily front-footed, and then they dig the nose. But for an example, I had made this 6'2" egg, and I made it with a really wide nose and a narrow tail, and I didn't really like the design, but somebody asked me to make it that way, and then he didn't like it, and I said, well, that's what you asked for, and I tried to explain that, but it's okay. But what I realized is I made a small one as a 6'2", and I made one as a 7'6" for myself, and I rode the 7'6", and I was ripping on it.
With the wide point in the nose.
With the wide point in the nose. It was super easy to get into waves. It had so much paddle power. But I surfed thrusters all my life, but I surf off the tail and on a thruster because I was more up and down like a vertical surfer, and I wasn't really a carving type of surfer, and I would use the tail a lot more. And I guess I learned how to keep that nose out of the water. I gave this 6'2", the same version, to a team rider, and he tried it, and he said that he was, digging the nose a lot. And then one day he came back to me and said, by the way, those changes we discussed about this board, because he liked it, other than that fact, he's like, dude, I surfed it on a juicy wave on the tail, and I never had an issue on the nose, on that wave. And I said, yeah, well, you got to surf, back to keep the nose up, so that you're surfing more like this, not like this,
Mm-hmm.
It's not really meant to be surfed that way. And he's like, oh, when I did that, it was amazing. And it's like, well, that becomes a board that's very unique and very niche and suited for a certain type of person.
So people did figure out how to ride it.
Yeah, and it works for that type of surfer, but some people don't surf that way, and that's the skill in shaping, I think, is to be able to make a board that works for the person that you're making it for. And that's what I do. I make custom boards, so if you want something a certain way, I understand what you're saying, and I know how to make it that way. It might take a try or two to get it exactly right, but we'll get there,
I mean, that's the cool thing about custom is that you might not get it right the first time, but like the second or third or the fourth board are super dialed, and you can't get that on the rack.
You can't get it on the rack. No. Those boards on the rack, those boards are dialed for the surfer that they're made for. You know, like whoever you're talking about, big companies, they work with a certain pro, and that pro gets that board dialed in, and they trust that pro, and then they release it to the public. Well, that pro doesn't surf like you. Not because the pro is better than you. He just has a different way of surfing. Everybody has their own style. You know, so that style may not translate to you. And what they do, these bigger companies, they have so many different versions with so many different team riders so that you can get close to something the way you surf. The problem is you'll never get it really dialed because those bigger companies don't have time for you. They have time for the pro surfers. They don't have time for you to, you know, and even if you spend a lot of money, say, hey, I'm willing to spend whatever it takes, they'll work with you, but, I mean, there's no real relationship there.
Right, he's not going to, like, talk to Matt Biolas at Lost. He's not going to pick up your phone call.
Right, and if he does, because you're somebody famous or something, maybe you'll get that, but you'll most likely get something that was off the rack, you know, or I'm sorry, not off the rack, off the machine. Maybe you'll change it a little bit from the machine, from the program, but that changing things on the program takes a lot of time, and there's a whole process in that, and generally they just, you know, you get something out of the machine, just you know, shrunk down or whatever, or bro dimensions or whatever, you know. But that shaper is probably not going to spend a lot of time just on you. It's just not cost effective for. Right, they don't need to as far as their business model is concerned. But the question is, what do you need? You know, not what they need; it's what you need. And somewhere along the line, I think that some shapers, especially you know, overseas companies, you know, they've forgotten that surfing is about the surfer, not about the money. You know, the money, I mean, it's important, but you know, close-knit relationships with surfers in local communities, that's something that's falling to the wayside. And
you know, so I pretty much have listened to like every single surf podcast I could find, and I've read every single surfer's journal, and I've done so much research, and pretty much what it all comes down to, everything I learned from doing all my research, it says, get a board from your local shaper and work with someone in your community. That's pretty much what I learned. And I was like, okay, so now I've done like 6 custom boards over the last like year and a half, and my surfing really has gotten better.
Yeah, like you're treating yourself right, you know, and you're getting what you deserve and what you want.
And you feel better than supporting like a Taiwanese company. I mean, like a brand like Firewire, where there's just like children like with slave labor making it in Thailand, and you know that where your money's going, and you know where your dollar's going, and helping like your friends rather than just putting it overseas.
Well, you know, there's another aspect to the local shaper support that is really important, and that's that local shapers who get to work with, you know, competent, accomplished surfers in their area, it teaches the shaper also. You know, like if you don't give a local shaper the time of day to actually make a board for you, you know, how will that shaper grow? You know what I'm saying? In the knowledge, you know, like you got to be able to push your boundaries as a shaper to make better stuff. And if you're not being pushed because everybody's going to the you know, the bigger companies, then that shaper doesn't get the exposure that they need to, you know, progress. Because if you think, okay, I've got experience as a surfer, so I can shape, you know, I've got good hands, I can figure out how to do it, fine. But you're going to make boards that are good for you. That's your experience. You know what I'm saying? But to be a good shaper, a good local shaper, good hand shaper, custom shaper, is to be able to make something that you want, not what I want. You know what I'm saying? So if you don't give me the time to make something for you and try and err and fix, then I'll never be able to grow into someone who can make boards for everyone. You know what I'm saying? So if you give your local shaper who has, some modicum of talent, some time and some business, that person will grow with you and become, a very dialed in shaper for you and, other people in the community.
Well, most people don't have patience for that.
They don't. So, I find that you have to be selective in your and do a little bit of research and find out whether this shaper has, like I said, a modicum of ability and skill. But if you can find someone who has promise, then give them a chance. And most of the time, the local guys, they'll, when they're starting out, they'll give you a deal. They'll give you, a cheaper. They'll probably, if you're a good surfer, they might sponsor you because they need your feedback. You know what I'm saying? So, that is something that's worth exploring.
And let's mention that you're mostly paying an extra $300 or $400 just for a logo.
A lot of times, yes.
So just because it doesn't have the CI or the Lost or the Firewire logo doesn't mean that it's not good.
100%. The problem with branding and logos is that with the advent of professional surfing and the focus that was shifted through magazines and media to that direction, people want to surf what the pros are surfing because they have a belief that if they surf the same thing as a pro, they're going to surf like the pro, which is not the case. Obviously having a good board for you is going to help you surfing, but it doesn't mean it's the whole hot chick with the board, or
Right.
like the Formula One driver is doing this race car. If I had that, I could drive even better. That's not true. It's not for you. That car is not meant for your style.
It's good marketing, though.
It is, and it works for them. But if I gave you 5 different boards that were all without a logo, and you had to choose out of that, and then you'd find one, you'd be better off than picking a board with just based on the logo.
I mean, that's what's cool about Step in the Dark. When they test all the boards without the logos by all the different shapers.
I've seen that. Yeah.
So then, they don't know who made it, and then it could be an underground guy.
Right. And that's good for exposure for the underground guy. That helps. But it's hard to break into the market with a relatively unknown label.
But if you don't start somewhere, you end up nowhere.
Well, a lot of people and a lot of shapers, they start. I did it all by myself, without being shadowing anybody or anything like that. But a lot of shapers end up getting in, to a shop. They hang around, clean the shops, kind of like trying to be in a biker gang,
Or being a tattoo artist or something.
Right. You got to hang around. You got to do the menial labor. Then you start to do a little bit of sanding or ding repair, then sanding. Then they'll teach you a little bit of glassing, maybe, or airbrushing, and then maybe they'll give you a chance to shape. Most times they don't give you a chance to shape. You got to figure it out on your own, and then you got to prove to them that you got some kind of ability, and then they'll be like, okay, we'll test you out on this or that. And then they end up shadow shaping or shaping for a different company. And then after they get some notoriety, after like 10, 15 years doing that, then they'll go off and break off and start their own business. But they'll have a little bit of clout because they used to shape for so-and-so. This guy was shaping Hobies or whatever. And now he's got his own thing, whatever.
You make it sound like Turtle in the North Shore movie.
I didn't... Turtle.
Turtle.
Right. It's exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. It's Turtle.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how a lot of people have done it. But who's Chandler? Chandler wasn't Turtle. Chandler started by himself.
Okay.
Turtle
I mean, it's a
understudy
movie.
Chandler. Yeah, but it's really very accurate in that sense. I enjoyed that about that movie. A lot of people shadow shapers, um, but it seems in surfing there's only like 2 or 3 generations. There was the OG shapers from the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then there was the new the understudies from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and now we got a new generation. So it's like 3 generations really.
That's it.
That's about it. Except for Hawaii,
Right.
like and the Pacific Islands, where that's
So there's only been like 75 years of shaping for foam.
as we know it.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah, around there. And you have about 3 generations, and the first generation was very, I think, very lucrative, and they were able to pop out a bunch of boards because it was a new thing, and there was a lot of opportunity for people to get into that. But once things started going, it became very closed-door, proprietary, don't steal my shape kind of thing, and that it was very hard to break into the business. And when I was growing up back in the early '90s, there was no chance I would get into shaping at all. I mean, when I got back from the army, back in 2009, I got out. I tried to, I approached a bunch of different shapers, and I got nothing. I was not able to go behind the curtain, and
Because they didn't want you to?
They don't know you. They don't know if you're gonna stick around. They don't know. They don't have the time to teach you. Maybe they didn't want to share their secrets. I mean, maybe they weren't busy enough. Who knows? But they just didn't want new blood at the time, and I forgot about it because I'm like, there's no way for me to do it, and I didn't realize that all I had to do was do it on my own, and it took me 15 years or 10 years to come into my own, where I'm like, you know what? Pardon my French, but fuck these guys, dude. I'll just do it myself. I'll make boards. And, I didn't do it because I wanted to make money. I wanted to do it because I wanted to. I went out to board shops, and I didn't see the kind of board I wanted to ride. And I said, well, I got time, and I got a little bit of money. Let me try and make a board that I want to ride, and I did that. And I made one for myself, and I made one for somebody else who I was teaching to surf at the time, and then somebody wrote it and wanted me to make one, and so I made another one, and I made another one, and then I made, after I made one, and I sold it to this person for like $300, and I was like, just for cost, and then I was like, I'll just make another one for myself because I like what I made for him. And it just kind of snowballed after that, and then I was just making boards, and now I was making enough boards that my neighbors across the street were complaining about the planer noise and the resin smell, and they were going to call the fuzz, and I tried to get into some shops with other people, still very closed doors, nobody let me in, and I was like, I'm doing 10, 12 boards a month, customs. I was like, it's time for me to get a shop. So I got a shop, and then the economy kind of took a dive. So, I mean, but when's the real, the best time to open? Well, the answer is always now. You know what I'm saying? Because you have the drive and you have the passion. It's time. So that's what I did. I opened a shop, and I did everything on my own. I learned to shape. I tested my own stuff. I learned to glass. My early glassing, I gotta say, it was hideous. The first board I ever glassed, I glassed in this room right here, and I put some. This is my den, by the way, and I put something on the floor, and I tried to glass it, and I got my ratios wrong on my catalyst, and you're supposed to put 2%, and I put 4%. Well, now I glass at 1% actually, but 2% for laminating, that's fast, and you can do it, but I don't do it that way. but I put 4%. Dude, it started to kick before I even tucked the laps under. They became hard. I wasn't able to do it. And then in the bucket, I had some left over, and it started to catch fire. And I was like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna burn my fucking house
Wait, catch
down!"
fire before just because it was too hot?
Yeah, you leave it in the bucket, and I kicked it too hot. The chemical reaction made it too hot. It started to smoke.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so it almost caught fire. It was a whole deal. But
his glassing's good now.
yeah, after I glassed probably, I don't know, upwards of maybe 1,000 boards. And,
Because he has other people who bring them from other brands to get glass at his shop.
Yeah, and I don't think I got good, like legitimately good at glassing till like the first 100 boards. I mean, they were passable, and you look at them okay, but there's little nuances and little things that make a glassing job really good. And number one is the sanding, but two, as far as the glassing goes, there's little tricks of the trade that you learn. And nobody taught me, but I learned through trial and error how to make a board look seamless and really a tight lamination that's not too heavy, that looks good, that's functional, that getting the weight right and the strength right. And
do you do epoxy?
I don't do epoxy. I mean, I've done several boards epoxy, but epoxy is a different animal than poly, and epoxy needs a temperature-controlled environment. Otherwise, like in the winter and it's too cold, I mean, you have to have a temperature-controlled environment. If it's too cold, it just doesn't cure. And I had that problem, so I, instead of telling a customer, this is not going to come out good, I just don't do it.
I used to ride a lot of epoxy boards before I did customs, and now I'm only on poly again, and I'm way happier actually, and I think I'm surfing better, and they're easier to fix because I go through dings and break my boards like almost every week, and it's just such a easier thing to deal with.
Yes. Well, epoxy is very temperamental, and it reacts to anything, man. If you any dust or anything whatsoever, it just goes boop, and it fish eyes in the hot coat, and it's much more difficult to use. It's more expensive resin.
Why did surfing take that route?
I think it's a couple of things. One, people believe that it's more eco-friendly and has less of a carbon footprint. I think scientifically that in the grand scheme of things, in the macrocosm of our carbon footprint, it's negligible. Okay? The difference between poly and epoxy, it's negligible. The amount of surfboards that are made, it doesn't really... It's not going to make the world crumble on itself, But the second thing is, and I think this is the most important thing, is that it had to do with the foam. EPS is really light. You can close the door if you want.
Thank you.
EPS is really light. So if you wanted a board that can, you can have weightlessness, really popping in the air, or just like that quirkiness, then you had to go with EPS or polystyrene. And styrofoam does not take to poly resin, so they had to come up with a resin that was not going to melt the foam, and that's epoxy.
So what are polyurethane boards made out of?
Polyurethane.
Okay, the foam's made out of polyurethane, so they use a polyurethane resin.
They use polyester.
Okay.
That is petroleum based. Petroleum is what eats through EPS foam. So you have to use epoxy, otherwise it'll eat through the foam. Now you can use epoxy on PU boards, but what's the point? I mean, people say it's harder, it's whatever.
It seems like they do that. Like, it seems like DHD does poly boards with epoxy resin, and they like talk about it. And, oh, Ethan Ewing's riding a PU board with epoxy resin. Like, you hear that in the WSL. Is that just all marketing, or like?
If there's a difference, it's negligible, and it really doesn't matter, because when you get to the point of making professional boards, they make them so delicate that they will break at the drop of a hat, but they're easily replaceable. For the pros, they have 10, 20 boards made for them at one time, so it's not like they need a board to last forever. So they make something that's as functional, functionally sleek as possible. It's a super high-end race car, but
you can put your foot through it.
Right. Like you drive a race car and you hit a tiny little thing on the floor and the whole goddamn fender comes off. Well, it's supposed to. You know what I'm saying? It's not supposed to be durable. So they make boards that are super high performance, but if you bought a board like that and you surf it, it's gone after 3 weeks.
It's not sustainable to like the average person.
Right. It's not meant for the average person. You can't readily replace boards like that. So I think that some things have made a difference, like making a board out of carbon or whatever. That it's stronger than fiberglass, but.
I met John Pizell Uluwatu, and I asked him if I should get a Dark Arts carbon fiber board, and he got mad at me, and he goes, "Why do you want that? Just get 2 regular boards, bro." That's what he said.
I get it. I think one, because it's a total different process. It's a vacuum bagging. It's the art of the one thing I can say about I don't know how much stronger carbon is than other fiberglass boards. I've never done a test. But what I'll tell you is that you can get a carbon board, it's going to be fucking black.
And that's hot. I mean, like, it's hot physically.
Yes, but it's also only black. I mean, your board you have right now, you can't do that in carbon.
Right. It seems like they're doing like half and half now.
Well, they're doing all kinds of stuff. They're trying different things, and a lot of things don't stick. But they don't stand the test of time. It seems like, it's going to be good now, but, whatever. I mean, this whole thing now with Varial. And, Varial, I had this whole lighter foam and their vacuum bagging and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I don't know if there's really that much of a difference into, and I've heard
Have you worked with it?
No. And I've never ridden one, but I'll say that I've heard people say it's the best thing in the world. I've heard people say they're the most delicate things in the world, and they fucking fall apart. They dent. The foam is not very thick. Like, I don't know. So I don't think that these technological advances really go anywhere unless it's like really like a total game changer. And one of those with total game changer was the EPS. Polystyrene. That took on, and it worked, and people really liked it. That took off. But short of that, I don't think.
I'm gonna grab. Can you close that window?
No. Oh,
you got it.
Yeah.
So let's try to wrap this up in the next 15 minutes. We just have 1 hour.
Okay.
What makes a good surfboard?
When you're having fun.
That's it. Not simple.
Yeah. Well, and that's an easy way of saying it, but the truth is, if you're not having fun, you're okay. You could not have fun just because you're a grumpy person. But all things being equal, if you're and you're having a good day and you're having good waves, if you're having fun on that board, then it's the right board for you. That makes it a good board. If it works under your feet, you like the way it feels, you don't have to fight the board, and the board does the work for you, I think that's a good board.
So if you don't bog, you can paddle into waves easy, and the board works without having to think about it.
Yes, I think the board works the way you want it to work. I think the way you want it to work is very subjective. That's what a custom shaper should be able to do, is to inquire and kind of bleed it out of you what you really like to feel, and then make something that is commensurate with the way you want to feel. And if we hit the mark and you're like, wow, this thing's like butter, this thing works so great, or you wanted something that paddles really, really easy and super stable. Some people don't like that. Some people really like that. And I've made boards that, like a longboard that's more high performance. I like going up and down on a longboard and really carving. Some people like to lock in that line and then run to the nose. And if you want a board like that, that's what you have to explain to your shaper. And there's ways to make that happen. And if I had to shout out to Anya in Santa Cruz. I made her a board, and the first board that I made her, she told me what she wanted. I made her a board for that. Later on down the line, fell off her car. She damaged it. She said, "Hey, can you make me another one? But this time, I want a little more of this, a little more stability, a little bit, ability to nose ride, a little more float, and more paddle speed. But I like this and I like that, so keep that." So I did, and I made her a new one. It was a year later, and it was nerve-wracking because I didn't hear anything for a long time. But I finally, like a couple days ago, she texted me back, "Hey, I've been having an awesome time on this board, and it feels great to, blah, blah, blah. Should I be worried about this?" She got a little ding. I was like, "Nah, 8 ounce, you're fine." But that is what worked for her. And I was able to make her something that works for her, and I'm happy that she's happy. And I think that's a good board, right? Because it works for her. So, what works for you, I'll say this. A lot of people are afraid to approach a custom shaper. There's typically several reasons, but one is because a lot of people are afraid that
they're not cool enough.
They're not cool enough.
They don't know enough about surfing.
Or they don't know enough about surfing. Exactly. They think that they're going to be laughed out of the factory. You don't know shit. Get out of here. You're a kook. Yeah. Any shaper who's worth their weight will not do that.
Well, think about this. If the local shaper has to be approachable if they want to make any business.
Yes, 100%. But some are not. And that's hard to, that guy can be extremely talented, but very off-putting and very distanced and very judgmental, and that doesn't really work very well.
Well, like sometimes I don't really like to go into surfer skate shops because I always feel like there's like an ego battle with the person behind the counter. They're like, "Who are you?" Or you're like, "What, dude? I'm just like trying to get some."
Oh, you're talking to me about surfing, dude? What do you know? I've been around forever. Yeah.
But like the shapers that I talk to don't seem to be like that. They're like more down to earth rather than like the 16-year-old who works at the surf shop, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's there's a whole different. You're standing in from a different angle when you're a shaper, and I think some shapers get jaded, but most often we understand that there's a different need for every different surfer, and that's important. So some shaper that recognizes that and has a little bit of talent, I think they're worth giving some of your time and some of your money. What were we?
How to make a good surfboard?
Yeah, we were talking about different shapers and the reasons for why people are hesitant to go get a custom. So another reason is that they are not sure what they want. Okay, you go to a rack at a shop and you're like, oh, that looks good, then you make a decision on that. But if you tell someone, hey, I'll make a board for you, they're like,
well, you have to be surfing.
I don't know what I want, I need examples,
You probably need to be surfing for a while to know what you want. Or a complete beginner and start that way.
All you have to do is tell your shaper what your experience is, how long you've been surfing, what you've been surfing, where you've been surfing. The shaper is the one to help guide you towards what you really ultimately want and need, by narrowing it down and then working with you to make something that you want. It's a collaboration.
Well, but you kind of need like at least 3 boards, I would say. I say you need a twin fin, a thruster, and like a bigger board, like an egg or a log, if you want to surf like every day.
Yes. Some people don't have the budget for that, so they'll have to. I mean, there's different ends of surfing, and some people have the budget to only have one board, so they have to go with something that can do the best on performance, but also do the best on the smaller days.
What do you think that would be, like a hybrid, like fish kind of thing?
That's subjective, and it really depends. For you, the range is a lot shorter and smaller. For an intermediate or someone who surfs points a lot, that range is a lot bigger. And it really comes down to what you like. So for you, I think something that you would want on an everyday board is more of a shortboard shape with a little bit wider outline, a little bit lower rocker.
Maybe a swallow.
Maybe something that's a little more top of the water, skatey, that has a lot of push and a lot of lift and flotation in smaller days. And that would be something that you could surf everywhere, but with enough of a performance aspect, just enough rocker to be able to get you into a little bit hollower wave. So if you wanted to go surf in Zuma, yeah, you could use it there, but it wouldn't be the best. But Can you get in? Can you get into the barrel? Sure. So we're talking about a groveler, something like that.
What does that even mean, that word?
I have no idea.
What is
I think you asked me that before. I have no idea why they call it that. I try to refrain from using those kind of terms. I only use it because people identify with it. So they go, oh, a groveler, okay. But I have no fucking clue what that means.
Where does it even come from?
I have no idea.
I have to look it up. I'll look it up.
I have no idea. In fact, I didn't hear the term till like the early 2000s or something, But to me, it was always a small waveboard,
That's like 20 inches wide.
Yeah, or even more if you want like a fish or something like a bigger fish. You can get you can get boards up to 22 inches wide. One of the fishes I make, I think it was 21 and a half, and it was only 5'4". But it's a really, really, from everyone who's tried it, loves the board. I haven't made a lot of them just because of the requests, but somebody came to me the other day and he's like, dude, you made this board for somebody else. Can you make me one of those? I'm like, I don't know if I still have the outline. It's probably somewhere in my plethora of like 100 outlines that I have. But that board is super wide, but the reason it works is because it's very, it planes really well, stays above the water, but I also give it a very curved outline. So the rail to rail transition is much easier. I mean, a lot of wider boards, their fishes have like a real deep swallow that helps you go from rail to rail. But this one has a unique shape that I find is very, it works very well off of the back foot and the rail to rail transition. But you can go pretty wide, you know what I'm saying?
So yeah, I wanted to ask you a question about that. So I was at Leo the other day and I saw someone, I'm not going to say whose board it was, but it was like a 7.2, but it was like, the rails were like really straight, and it looked really weird to me because like most surfboards have like a curvy rail. What does a straight rail do?
Okay, so if you understand, if you had a rectangle of a board, okay, the stability from rail to rail would be the same in the nose and the same in the tail, and same in the center.
Okay.
Okay. If you wanted it to be able to go from rail to rail a little bit better in a different part of the board, then you pull in the outline. Okay. So that, if the outline gets really, really tight, then it'll go rail to rail, no problem. You know what I'm saying?
So a pintail turns rail to rail easier than a wider tail.
Yes.
Okay.
But a pintail has what you have a longer rail line. So your question about the longer rail line is that with a longer rail line, with less curve in the rail line on a flat surface or, like a wall or something like this, if your outline is curved, then you only have a very small portion of the board holding in there.
Okay.
If you have a long rail line, and this is your wave, and you have a long rail, the whole rail is in the water all at the same time.
Knifing through.
Right, it's all holding, and the water wraps around that, so it becomes very stiff.
It's almost like if it has more fins.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, well, if you make a board that has like really round rails and really long straight rails, you can almost get away, because it has so much hold, you can almost get away with not having a fin.
Okay.
It has
so
that
like,
much hold.
So that would be good for like a finless board. That's why the Aleas are so rectangular. Or the Alea.
I'm not familiar with that one.
The finless wooden Hawaiian surfboards?
Yeah. That would work really well without a fin.
Okay, that makes sense.
It'll have a lot of hold, and the rounder it is, hard edges on a board breaks away water. Breaking water away means that it will slide, and the only thing to stop it from sliding is a vertical fin to give it resistance. So on a thruster, you have hard rails all the way up to the center, usually, but you have the fins in the back giving you so much hold and drive. Without that, with the hard rails, you'd have no hold, no drive. You just spin out.
And then a round rail, let's say a 2 5/8 round rail. What does that do?
It's going to give you hold. Not going to give you a lot of hold, but it'll give you some hold in certain parts of the board that you want it to have hold.
Because remember that 6.2 I got? That I had you glass, and it was 2 5/8. I brought it to the North Shore, and I surfed Haleiwa, gas chambers, and Ayukai beach break with it, and I surfed a big day in Malibu, like the big day, and it did really well, but it had really stiff Arakawa thruster fins in it. So I don't know.
But it depends, and that rail. You see, that's the thing about boards and custom boards. That rail may work for you, not work for somebody else.
Okay.
It depends on how much you weigh, how much rail you're using in your turns. If you got something that's got really thick, like that guy that I made that bogus for, right? The one you saw out Leo or wherever on the blue board.
Yeah.
Right. That was probably the third or fourth board I ever made in my whole life.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's like a really early board, and I made it with the rails really, really narrow, or really pinched and foiled down.
Yeah. Because
I wanted a board that had the length and paddle speed, but I wanted to be able to really put it on rail and really let it, But if you have a really thick rail, okay, when you make a turn, it has an amount of buoyancy to where when you try to put it in the water, it's going to pop back out.
So it pushes against.
It pushes against. So the less you have in the rail, the easier it's going to go into the water with less effort. So when you make a turn with a really pinched rail, that rail is not going to want to come back out. So it's not going to limit your turn. Your turn is going to keep going because you're going to be able to bury that rail.
So a thinner rail, you can bottom turn and go straight up quicker.
Yeah, but the recovery is not the same. You don't have the bounce out. Sometimes you need a little bit of resistance because then your board will go into the wave face and kind of stay in there and not lift back out. But if you have too much, then you're going to try to make that turn and bury your rail, and it's just not going to want to go.
And it's only going to go at like 9 o'clock, not 12.
It's just not going to allow you to do that. So there's a balance of how much rocker you have in the board, which determines what your turn radius is going to be, along with the thickness of the rail. That's going to allow you to achieve that and not get stuck and not prevent. You know what I'm saying?
So
there's
it
a
can't
happy
be
medium
too
with it.
thin.
It can't be too thin, yeah, because then if it's too thin, then it's just too much. You can't recover from that. You know what I'm saying?
None of your rails are under 2 inches?
No. So I make my rails very. If I choose to, I make a thicker center in the board and I foil down the rails because
the deck. And the deck gets thinned out?
Not all the time. I don't. You know, like if you get a normal board, a short board, whatever, it's 2 5/8, right? It's going to be 2 5/8 in the center,
rail,
all the way out.
Okay. That's in the center.
Right, but it's basically a flat deck all the way to the rails, and you get really chunky rails, right? But I can make a board that's 2 5/8 and then taper it down, foil it down, so the rails are similar to 2 1/4, 2 and whatever. So, or 2 1/4 inch thick board.
2 1/4 is pretty standard, you would say, right?
Well,
it depends.
Yeah, it depends. There's so many variations. I don't like to say anything.
Because I rode a board that was 2 1/4 yesterday, and it just felt a little bit thin, so I wanted like 2 3/8, which is like what, like a hair thicker.
Yes, and this is the difference between hand shaping and computers. If you say to a guy who makes the computers, I want, instead of 2 1/4, I want something 2 3/8 or 2 2.5 or whatever. The whole board is going to be thicker, but also the rails are going to get thicker. Okay, because if not, he's got to refoil the whole board on the computer. Okay, when I shape a board and you say you want it that thick, I can make the same rails no matter how thick you want the center. You know what I'm saying? So that'll give you a little bit of extra float, but the rail performance will be the same. That should be a constant for you, unless you're trying to get a different type of ride.
So you can plane it.
Right, because I'm doing the computer work with my hands.
Right. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? The only thing I do on the computer is the outline. And I take the outline, I print it out into a life-size piece of paper, and then I cut it out onto a piece of masonite, and then I have that template forever.
Kinko's, or you do it at your house?
So I do the design here, and then I have someone who completes the bottom line for me, and then puts it on a life-size like JPEG image or whatever, and then he sends it back to me, and then I'll send it to a place like Kinko's. Then they'll print it out, and I get a large roll printout. I'll cut it out by hand, and I'll put it on the masonite, and I'll cut out the masonite, and then I have.
So you have a lot of templates.
I have a lot of templates, dude. I not only do I have a lot of templates, I have a lot of templates I haven't made yet. A lot of potential designs I've designed, and then I think about it, and I'm like, I'll put this on the back burner. Let's wait. And a lot of times that's subject to the fact that I have to pay rent in my shop, so I have to make something that I need to sell right away. But there could be gold in there that people want. I just haven't gotten around to it.
People want them because I was at Drill in Malibu, like just looking at boards with my friend Zoe, and she goes, "Look at this board, Zach," and it was this orange Wellenzeit, and I'm like, that's Johnny's board, right? And she didn't even know it was yours. Like she didn't even know anything about it, and she like gravitated to it. She like touched the rack. She's like, "This is the one I want." And I'm like, I know him. Get that one. Support him.
Yeah.
So people really do like your boards.
Well, thank you.
Dirk loves his log.
Oh, yeah.
He's like a 9.2 or something.
Yeah, he's got the green one.
Yeah.
That was one of my test boards. He loved it. So
and then his girlfriend, Melissa, I think, has one too.
She does.
Yeah.
Dirk has gotten a few boards from me.
Yeah. And I've ridden a few demo ones that I really liked. I rode the 6.8 Mox Nix.
Yeah.
Single fin. That one felt really good. It was a little thinner than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those eggs, they're really boaty.
Was that an egg? It seemed like it was more like a step up.
Yeah. Well, I like I said, I hate to put labels on things, but for general purposes, I guess I would consider it an egg.
All right, let's finish off with the egg. That's such like a interesting shape because how big can an egg be? How big can an egg be, and how small can an egg be?
The egg.
Is it high performance, or is it for like geeks or like people who can't surf?
So the egg is such a wide, has such a wide use with that nomenclature. It's used to describe many boards that are just not your typical board, and I think that a lot of eggs are not eggs. But when you get an egg, the characteristics of an egg is a blunted nose and tail.
Rounded.
So rounded, and you have usually the wide point is either in the center or forward, above center.
Is it
eggs,
flat?
Eggs are traditionally very paddle friendly. They're lower rocker, meant for ease of paddle, speed, and down the line surfing.
Not very top to bottom.
No, not at all. Eggs are traditionally more of the lazy daisy, sweepy, protracted turning kind of board.
So like First Point, Leo Carrillo.
Yeah, those are great places for eggs. Any point break, some most reef breaks too, if they're not too hollow. Something where you want to get in, early, and you want to have a lot of speed and a lot of float, with a little bit of a performance aspect.
But when did you like? Sometimes I'll like make fun of someone, and like kind of like you should just be riding an egg at him, and then he's like fuck, and like get all bummed, Is it just kind of like for like a beginner, or like it could just be for like a 1 to 2 foot day?
Eggs are not. Okay, some people can believe that eggs are for beginners, and if you're not a beginner, you should probably use shortboard. That's not the case. I think that every wave has a board that should be used to surf it.
Okay.
And that changes with each individual surfer. But will you be able to surf a mushier, forward-moving wave with a shortboard? Sure. Is it going to be the best board? Well, it depends on you.
You might be Huntington hopping like the whole thing.
Right.
So an egg can trim on a mushy, crappy wave easier.
Right. And if you want, you can get on the tail and kind of whip it around.
Okay.
Depending on what it is. Now,
are they all single fins?
No. So some eggs are twins, singles, 2+1s.
But not really thrusters. Maybe a 1+2. You
can, like this shape here is, that's a Mox Nix.
The 6.2?
Yeah. Okay. Except the Mox Nix, this is what we call a Mox Mod. I took the wide point of the Mox Nix, which is 5/8 of the way up the board. I moved it down to center. Now it looks like a grovelly performance step up kind of board.
It's still a little bit round and wide.
Yeah, like an egg.
Right. Okay.
Except it's
as
not
a pulled
really
in nose and tail.
Yeah. Except the difference is if I raise the wide point, also the nose will fill out, and then you get an egg.
Okay.
That's the only difference between the Mox Nix and this one. So when I lowered the wide point, it filled out the tail. It brought in the nose. So now it's more performance because the nose is less wide. You can get into a steeper wave. You're not going to, catch the nose. But the tail is also a little bit wider, so it's more flotacious. Therefore, it works better in slower waves or tighter maneuvers where you have more resistance on the tail and more float, and you can actually get some more vertical action. So it's like a more performance version of the Mox Nix. The Mox Nix, if you want but a traditional Mox Nix is 6.2, you'd really be looking at a little bit more paddle speed, a little bit less performance wave. You know what I'm saying? More down the line. This will work in a beach break. Mox Nick's
Well, I
really
rode
good.
the Mox Nick 6.8, and it was a single fin, but it felt like a thruster.
Yes.
Maybe it was like a 7.5-inch single fin or something that you let me borrow.
Yeah. So the Mox Nicks, I got onto a few eggs, right about the time when, the CI mid came out, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I think it's right about the time I was shaping or whatever, but I bought one of those because I wanted to, I was like, oh,
That's like a $1,400 board.
Well, it was. When I got it, it was like $850.
Okay.
I got it like really early, before it became really popular.
That's why it's expensive, just because it's popular.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. They're like, oh, we're selling out of these, so let's charge out the ass for it. And then, I don't know if it's very much popular anymore, but the price definitely had a rubber band effect on that. But
it seems like everyone who's over 50 years old has that board.
yeah. Well, I had one as a 7.6, and what I'll tell you is that I rode it and I felt it was very stiff.
It's flat and wide in the nose.
It's a very flat board. It has a double concave that goes very, very high up the board, and I felt that was a little bit tracky. It didn't really allow, like, the water was traveling down one side or the other, and to make that transition was much more difficult. I think that board with that double concave that goes that way up on a shorter version of that board makes more sense, because that double doesn't go as far.
If it was like a 6,
you know what I'm saying?
6.8 or
6.8, yeah.
Okay.
But as a 7.6, that board was a little bit stiff.
That makes sense because the water was pulling too high up. Okay.
And that wouldn't allow the transition because your power point is on your back foot.
Mm-hmm. And it was
Not
going
in your
past.
front foot.
It was going past that.
It started way too early.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The water trapment on one side of the board started way too early. And I felt that the rails were kind of thick and it wasn't buried the way I wanted it to. It became like you try to pivot it, but then it would bog. And it really only worked better in bigger waves. But the paddling was great. And I think there's a variance of what you can do, but I like the width of the nose and the paddle speed. And I definitely took that into consideration when I made the Mox Nicks. That was important to do. But I also changed what I thought that type of board really needed based on the bottom contours, the shape of the tail, and what I wanted the board to do. What I wanted to do, get into a wave early and then rip the shit out of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, don't we all?
On a good wave, So the Mox Nicks on like a 2-foot day doesn't work. It's not meant for that. It's meant for a proper day, like when you have a proper day at like C Street or something where, you've got a wave that's like 4, 5, 6 foot and you need a little bit more paddle speed because they're rolly. Yes.
Yeah.
But that open face, once you get some speed on that board, because the tail is so narrow, you don't get the speed wobbles at the bottom. You don't have too much flotation on the tail. It's perfect to just start really carving on that thing.
Well, that's what I realized. At C Street, you want like a 6.6 mid-length-ish board because it works better because it's so slow. Right. And I figured that out only recently. I don't know. You remember that 6.6 I made that for Zoe, but she didn't want it, and
Yeah, right. I remember. Yeah.
And I wrote it like a few weeks ago, and I was like, oh, I'm so happy I have this board in the quiver because it went so well, and it was like a fat twin fin 2+1, and I was like, oh, this is my C Street board.
Yeah. Well, you should have a C Street board.
Yeah.
So
I'll keep that one.
Just don't surf C Street.
Yeah, only like 4 times a year.
Don't ever go there. C Street's a terrible wave.
And don't ever go there on Christmas break or spring break or any holiday. Just don't go there.
Just never go to C Street. Never go. And I'll surf it all the time because I like to torture myself with terrible waves.
All right, let's close with that, bro. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zach.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
That was really fun, Johnny.
Absolutely.